So hello everyone, thank you all for showing up. I think there's going to be more people dropping in and out. If you're just listening or you don't have a mic, please feel free to use the chat box on the right to ask questions and we will answer those as we go. If for some reason the chat box doesn't work for you, please feel free to use Slack and we'll keep an eye on that and try and ask any questions there. So I haven't got a formal topic for this chat. I think we've covered most of the basics over the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks and through the various videos I've been putting out. But hello, whoever just turned the mic on. But there's still lots, obviously, that we can talk about, that I can talk about. But there were quite a few questions that were out there. So it might be good just to start with those questions, and then we can sort of expand things out of that as needs be. I'm still planning on putting together a couple of videos talking more about test runners, representatives, analyzers, just trying to do really like 2 to 5 minute introduction videos, and then also do a couple of deep dives probably into the analyzer to look at how that's worked for track so far and any lessons that we can take away from that. So those will be coming in the next few weeks. I'm also planning on putting a couple together about managing open source communities and that sort of stuff as well. There's been a few questions about that recently, and I thought that could be some interesting content. So if anyone's got anything they want to ask or suggest about any of that, I'll try and factor some of that into those videos. But I figure they could be useful resources in general, and also nice ways to try and pull more people into Exercism's contributing ecosystem. So that's my sort of starting play. I'm going to let Tim ask his questions first because he was the first person to get on there. Let me just find where they were on Slack. Yeah, so Tim, do you want to ask your first question?
Sure. So the thing that we were discussing, me and Cohen, is that in the Elixir language, you have the ability to specify the language version for the project. And previously in the Elixir track, we had been allowing students basically to run from 1.6 up to the present 1.10 or latest minor patch. And we're just wondering, just kind of like, what is the trend of the tracks of allowing students to go back, or are you maintaining different versions for the test runner versus the track? How is it being communicated to students what version we are teaching or mentoring to? And I could see this being an issue just in other languages as well, like I was saying, like for C, looking at C11 versus C18, or as Java releases, feature releases every 6 months now. Yeah, so just looking for kind of ideas, and so we can kind of have a consistent standard.
Cool, thanks. So I'm interested in everyone's thoughts on this in a sec. I think one of just a few general high-level thoughts from me. This is always an interesting one in Ruby. So whereas other languages tend to, make huge sort of paradigm shifts forward in their releases, Ruby tends to just add more cool helper methods to classes. And so there seemed to be a trend for a while where it was almost like someone was adding a helper method to Ruby core that just solved an Exercism exercise each time. So you would go from solutions that required 10 lines of code to literally a function call or a method call every time. So this became quite a challenge for Ruby because the version of Ruby that someone was using could literally make something change between a caller method or run a massive program. So there is a real tangible problem there. And then there's also stuff in thinking of the different examples we give, with JavaScript, for example, where there's a constant evolution of language. The different ways you can express yourself change quite a lot. So there is a real issue here. I think in terms of the in-browser coding setup, there's going to be one version that is written to adhere to, and the test runners that are built for that version. And so similarly, the tests that run when a student submits their code are going to be run against one specific version as well. So I think tracks will need to decide on a version that is their canonical Exercism version. and we need to make that clear within the UI, and both for the people using the CLI, but also when people are using the in-browser coding to tell people what environment they've actually got to work with. That, of course, doesn't mean that people can't use other versions locally if they're playing around. There's degrees of backwards compatibility and things that just implicitly happen. And how people choose which version they're going to run on is definitely going to be different for different languages. I think my general sort of feeling is that we probably don't want to be on, bleeding edge. We want to have some level of stability in the release and some level of easy distribution as well. So however that works for your language, it's very different in different languages. But I don't think we want to be on nightly releases, for example. We had a big debate, I think, on the Rust track about this with the test runner. There was sort of a desire to be on nightly releases, and we weren't so keen on that. So I think the conclusion there was like locking to a nightly release, but locking to a specific version of a nightly release rather than just whichever nightly release the Docker image happens to get built at a time. So yeah, those are some just general thoughts. I don't know if other people have got specific thoughts on their languages or other stuff. Eric, have you, in reviewing all of the test runners and things, had any discussions about this?
No, the language I'm working with are mostly C# and F#, and well, they do point releases once every 6 months or so, and it's very easy to upgrade. Backwards compatibility is usually very good, sometimes even forward compatibility. So for those tracks, we don't really have that issue. I know that Sasha, for example, has a desire for Julia to specify a minimum version, and he submitted a pull request that allowed someone to specify the supported language versions in the meta config JSON of an exercise. It's also somewhere in the docs, if I can find it. So you don't have to use it, but you can if you'd like to. So the idea is that you might be able to, for example, that a test runner could detect which version you were using. But I would argue that if you don't really need it, I would just pick one major version and, well, once in every while update. Most users don't really mind getting up to date with the latest, I found, for C# at least. Unless you have to compile all sorts of weird things. But if you got a reasonably language that is easy to install, I think just pick one version, update every whatever 6 months, year, whatever makes sense. And indeed, I would refrain from using things that are still in flux, like preview releases, etc.
What was your instinct, Tim, when you were thinking about this?
I think me and Cohen, the thing we were bouncing back and forth is, I think my perspective is from like the test runner and making sure that people understand like the environment it's running in, because at least my experience like with the research project, which was very good, very good. But I could see that if for some reason like an old compiler error was cropping up, which I've had for students, because like if I was running the last minor patch and they were running a previous minor version, a compiler error would stop their exercise from working at all, and I just don't want that to be like a source of frustration, because I could see the conversion from that error happening to them making a meaningful reach out for help might be very low, and then that might just say like, I'm gonna just try out a different language, and
Yeah.
So that's my instinct, at least the perspective. And so I really wanted to kind of like go with the last minor version, but Cohen has a good point that like we've supported 1.6 and greater, because I think Elixir, lots of its founders come from the Ruby world, and their goal has also to been very careful about having breaking changes in minor version releases. So we wanted to be able to support them, because package versions are often quite a bit behind the last minor release. So if people are typing in to just get Elixir on their system, they might be running 2 or 3 versions behind, because I think Ubuntu is still running 1.7 or 1.8 as their last major version or last minor version. So, so
that
yeah,
feels to me like a key point with that breadth of distribution.
mm-hmm. So I think what we've kind of settled on, at least for ourselves, unless it changes here, is, we're not going to restrict students from using minor versions, but we're really hoping that we can communicate it well what version we are running the test runner on.
So I think in terms of the in-browser coding, this matters less because there won't be that disconnect. Somebody's writing in a window, and we can show when the tests are running there what they're running on. Whereas for the somebody solving it and then submitting it, that's where it feels a bit more like there could be that disconnect. The tests run on their computer and then not on Exercism. So it feels like, if that happens, if the tests fail, maybe we do highlight very clearly there, we're running on this version of Elixir. Let's make sure that, double check that it runs correctly on this version for you, but also making sure that that's communicated in the original CLI download in the README or something that says the tests will be run against this version. So there's an expectation set initially. I wonder, Eric, as well, I've put the link in the chat thing to the key referenced. I wonder if we need to sort of get all of the tracks in their own config.jsons just to put a version key in there that's the default version key for that language. That is what we then demonstrate, what we then show for test runners and other things, and just make sure that test runners are built against whatever is in that sort of canonical language specific config.json.
Yeah, so I was wondering because if you do it for every single exercise, you could have different versions for different exercises. Would that make sense to do?
No, I mean, probably not, unless we're going to have different test runners for different exercises, which is unlikely.
So one of the things I was thinking about is, for example, in Elixir, so if a student downloads the exercise through the CLI, they get a project system locally running. Is there a language version specified in any of these files? So can you detect what the student is using? Because the test runner will get the same files that the student has. So you might maybe detect which version they were using and then get a proper error message out.
Maybe, yeah, I see what you mean. So as in, yeah, the error message might say we've been running on this. It looks like you were running on that. We could certainly look at supporting that. I mean, for Ruby, that's probably quite straightforward. I mean, this always comes down to the challenge of what people choose to upload when they upload things via the CLI. And this has been probably the longest ongoing debate in Exercism generally is, can we get people to submit other stuff as well as just that file reliably? So I'll be interested to hear from Sasha as well, because Sasha, I think, was the one pushing for the language version key in the first place. So it'd be interesting to see what I know he's
It appears that Michael had a very
yeah, that was why I was
clear response there.
If anyone watching this and not reading, your pitch was not impressed with the idea of having different versions of the test runner on a per exercise basis.
He's also been using the language that had a major version bump that probably caused the most issues ever, Python. So I can
I think the general guidance that I'm going to go with here is let's try and get every language to choose what their version is. Let's make sure the test runners are built to run against that version. Let's make sure that when we download exercises via the CLI, people have clarity on what version the tests are going to be run against. Let's make sure that the in-browser UI has that as well. And let's make sure that if there's an error message that tests fail, that we show that one reason might be a mismatch of a version. And if we can get any extra information out of the student submission that tells us what version of the language they're running, let's try and concatenate that into the error message as well. That would be my summary of that. I think it's probably worth, when we watch this back, just jotting that down as an issue, as a to-do that we document somewhere. And then we can always expand that issue if other people have got thoughts on that. Because I'm sure languages are different in how easy and hard it is to do different versions and things. So it'd be good to think about that across the board. Cool. That was I think, one question that you just fleshed out, Tim.
Yeah, just the one.
Cool. Eli, you're up.
Yeah, I had a series which I'll probably edit to prefer broader discussion, but I think the big one for me is kind of the meta overview, like how we're doing across tracks, like kind of progress, and how might that align with kind of the stated goals before or shift. So maybe just speaking to that for a few moments, and then I'll go on to the next question, which is more specific to people porting exercises in their tracks.
Cool, that's a really helpful question. So the first thing I'd say is that I really want to make this more obvious, just straight off, so you can look at the V3 repo and get a feel for how we're doing, both on a sort of overall basis and a per track basis as well. I think we've had that discussion about different ways we could just have a summary thing that comes out. I don't think it'd be too hard to do. On DJ's tracks dashboard, there's sort of an overview of some of that stuff, but it's probably easiest just to expose that out and then have a link to that in the V3 README generally. In terms of my perspective on how we're doing, I think I'm pleased in general with progress. I feel like getting a V3 repository, a V3 language ready is an exercise in momentum. The initial step to make a first concept exercise in a language is a challenge for every maintainer, because there's both a huge amount of conceptual understanding to get, and there's then a huge amount of sort of technical understanding of how all the files fit together, and et cetera, et cetera. It feels like a big piece of work. There's often review cycles, and I've got a bit frustrated recently with the fact that those review cycles can often be too long, and they're too long for a good reason, which is people want to get the exercises really right, and lots of people are pitching in to try and do that. I think we need to work out how we, for now, just get good enough first cuts of lots of exercises down that we can then refine later. But I think, and I think Tim said this as well, once you've got the first exercise or two done, suddenly it's like a weight lifts and the whole thing feels a lot easier and a lot more exciting and a lot more free. You don't feel the complexity of it, because actually it's really simple. It's really simple, but it has complexity. There's nothing conceptually difficult about what we're trying to do. It's just write a simple story with 3 or 4 tasks, write a 2-paragraph introduction to a concept, ship it. That's basically it. But there are so many moving parts in that it does take a while to understand those moving parts and feel comfortable with them, which is where the complexity is. But it is like, get over that first hump or barrier and then stuff starts smoothing out. So the fact that lots of tracks have now done that, and I feel like most tracks have at least one maintainer that's got a first exercise on. Some tracks have got a couple. Those people then often are very sort of keen to do a second and third exercise, because they want to put the sort of probably multi-hours of learning that have gone into that first exercise to bash out another one for an hour, and etc. I mean, I think Eric can bash out an exercise in like an hour or two now. Eric, is that fair?
I'd say 3
or 3.
No, I just did it yesterday.
Yeah.
So I started somewhere in the afternoon, I think 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and I finished 4 o'clock. So you had a couple of minor issues, mostly documentation-wise and language-wise, but the general gist was there. I think you should be able to, if you've done a couple, within a couple of hours, you could do one from scratch, because this was also an exercise that I had to come up with a theme myself. I also wanted to come up with a theme myself, but if you're borrowing another theme, it might even be less. So yeah.
I think, and I think that's really true. And I think if we say we wanted to launch a track in ambitiously like 10 weeks from now, if everyone put 3 hours in a week, we would have 10 exercises per maintainer. And so that's why I feel like that momentum is the important thing, because there is that big learning hump at the beginning. But once that's over, if what maintainers were doing were just bashing out an exercise each week, I think we can, if most tracks had three maintainers, we could get to 30 exercises before we launch for most tracks. It's just a sort of attrition chipping through, and then when there is sort of shared forking of different exercises between tracks, that gets even easier and quicker as well. And it's one of the reasons why I don't want these big pull review processes, because it can take 3 hours to write a exercise and then 5 hours of just chipping away 10 minutes here and there, which is just soul destroying. So I think I'm pleased that most tracks have got that first stage done. I feel like I still get frustrated when there's massive discussion about what should and shouldn't happen on a track, rather than just bashing out a couple of exercises, because I think that clarity really appears once you start making your first exercises. And I also think the more fun exercises will be the later ones in tracks. At the moment, we're just sort of messing around with things that introduce strings and numbers, which aren't really, frankly, very exciting. None of us choose our languages on which ones do strings the best. But getting those things out the way will give us the knowledge that then means we can start doing, the fun stuff in our languages that people are going to want to use Exercism for. So yeah, that's me talking to that for a couple of minutes, Eli. Does that sort of sum up enough?
Yeah, that does. Thanks. Yeah,
Cool.
just kind of curious on like the big picture. And yeah, Michael, I do appreciate your comment about Rust strings, because I was going to say of any language, perhaps some people go to Rust for their strings. Yeah, I think the second question I have is a continuation of that, more for like people on the ground. I guess, Eric, it sounds like you're the resident expert for concept exercise creation, so certainly like we can dwell on your wealth of resource there. I also would be curious, like everyone else, like while you're doing these, creating exercises, creating the issues, or actually implementing concept exercises for your track and language, what has surprised or intrigued you most about that, whether the process or taking one of your declared concepts and actually fleshing it out? So yeah, maybe just kind of open conversation about that. So maybe Eric, I'll direct that first at you.
Yeah,
And then
sure.
if anyone else feels like chiming in, please do, because I'm broadly interested in like the various tracks and individuals.
Yeah, so I get to see most of the pull requests that are being done. Not everybody will ping me and ask for feedback. I think probably most people should, at least for the very first couple of exercises. But I'm also seeing that once I've commented on one or two, that the maintainers then they get it and they can churn out the new ones fairly easily without lots of feedback from me. And in some cases, they just want verification that whatever they're doing is fine by me. And most of the time it is. So I just have tiny comments. So I think I would argue that if people were starting with this, please do include me in their reviews. So I might not know your language, but I will know how to set up a concept exercise. And if I've done one or two reviews, I'm fairly certain that everybody will know what they are doing and they can work out everything themselves.
I also think it's great to get reviews from people that don't know your language. Like, I definitely
True.
review exercises in languages that I don't know better, because I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Whereas if I already know that language, I can't make that judgment call as well. So I think even, Eric's done pretty much every track on Exercism, so he knows most languages to a certain extent. But, don't be afraid to get people from other languages who don't know it to review as well, because I think there's huge value in that.
Yeah, and I've also seen an uptake in the number of submissions last week. So I think the video that Jeremy did really helped. And we're also trying to update the documentation now, in part based on what Mike DeMay has found on when doing a C# pull request. So we're trying to get everything set up that it's easy for people to know what they should be doing. So in the beginning, there was a lot of knowledge that was just, inside my head. So if I would get hit and under a bus and Jeremy wasn't there, you just flail around. But now we're trying to document that properly so that everybody we can point to documentation, they can read it, they can watch a video. And I think that's really helpful just to get over that initial hump of where you don't know what is expected of somebody when doing a concept exercise. Because there are lots of rules, but they're not hard or big rules. You have to know them.
DJ, the question is, what things have we learnt in implementing or designing concept exercises so far, are there any sort of tips, tricks, surprises, etc., that you might want to raise to help others?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I'm going to say wasted, but I don't mean it in a bad way, but there's a lot of time wasted figuring out which concepts you're actually targeting or is a prerequisite. And I've noticed that what works really well is to just build your exercise and not decide on that, and then open a PR and then have everyone else discuss it. Because what I've seen quite a few times is that someone thinks, oh no, this is what I'm targeting, and then it becomes a PR, and they're fixed in that notion that that is what they've been writing for, and first being defensive, because obviously in their mind that's how it is, and then everyone else is, but no, that's not the concepts you're targeting. So in other words, I think determining which concept you're actually are prerequisites is more of a group effort than something you can do yourself. And I think as these tracks grow, you're going to see that more and more and more.
So
Another
just to build on that as well, like I think I regret how much sort of we talked at the beginning about these exercises as concept pathways, because I think everyone is focused on that rather than on just teaching concepts well.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
If every exercise just was built to teach a concept, and then in 2 months we look at all of the concepts we've got and say, okay, how do these things fit together? Okay, we need to insert 5 more exercises here to make a tree make sense. I feel we would have got a lot further, a lot faster. Because I think it's too much to try and hold a whole track in your head. It's like writing a whole textbook in your head before writing page 1.
So I don't do that.
You're not?
So no, I don't. So I don't have the whole picture in my head. I have bits and parts of it, and some things I postpone because I'll deal with them later. As DJ said, it's just so much better to just build things and then see what comes from that. So sometimes I'm building something and I'm found, have I introduced this concept already? No. Then I can decide, does it make sense to also include it in this exercise, or does it warrant a different exercise? If it warrants a different exercise, I don't have to write it immediately. I can just create an issue or put a note somewhere. But you find these things just by building them.
Yeah.
It's not doable to get this whole fancy tree with prerequisites beforehand. Just
It's
build
also not
things.
important.
No.
It's not important that we have a working tree. It's important that we get these exercises started and built, and then we'll figure out what's missing in the end. But I think the other thing that is tangent on this is what was it? It's a very similar problem or challenge. So where do we post in what concept do we post the exercises? And in particular, we have this case now where we have a concept Booleans and we have a concept Boolean logic.
Mm-hmm.
And the Boolean exercises, in most cases, will be teaching Boolean logic. Are we going to duplicate the exercise on all these concepts because we're not denoting Boolean logic as a concept we're teaching in the Boolean exercise?
So I'd argue for duplication here because different people might start looking at different files. So somebody, when they were designing something to do with Booleans, would look at Boolean logic or whatever it's called, and others would look at Booleans. I think just duplicate the information. It's also a bit that you don't have to revisit often. So you put it there once and then it's really static because your exercises don't often change that much. But the Booleans one is also one I found. Sorry?
Are you talking about the reference files in these 2 different things?
Yeah.
So I don't know how much people are using those files at the moment, but I think at some point they will be very useful. For example, if you're doing Booleans now, we have 2 stories. So there's a one based on the JavaScript track, and I think that does a RPG style theme. But there's also one based on Pac-Man, which is also really awesome. So it's really great to have that in a file where people can just, well, select the one they like best and they think would work best for their language. And if there's a little duplication, yeah, so be it. But I think this is one of the cases where there might be duplication, and there is no duplicate strings concept, for example.
Right.
There might be string formatting. You could argue with that, but many concepts will just have one thing.
Yeah. So in general, I mean, my feeling is that I would be okay with the duplication, but we just all need to agree that we're going to be okay with that, because
Yeah.
I can understand why it feels, itchy. Because
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, but it's it's part of this concept, so why should I put it here too? I'm like, well, because the goal of those documents is that people can find it.
Precisely.
And like you're saying, we're not going to be updating them a lot.
Yeah.
And that's
And
the language specific reference, or is this the
the
kind of
general, yeah.
Yeah, the
So this
general
is
one.
what can be found in /reference/concept/types. So let me put an example. I can look at the
so
Booleans
that
one.
being kind of the master, dictionary
Yeah,
that you derive from, because at some level your exercise concept just contextualizes that for your language.
Yeah, and the purpose was there that it would be an easy way of going. They had three purposes. One was that it would be an easy way to go and find information about that concept. Two, that if there were really good canonical links that all tracks could use to explain a concept. So, for example, take the concept on recursion. If there's like actually a better example, take the concept on floating point numbers. There's a really great floating point numbers website. I can't remember what it is, but somebody will probably post it. Which every track probably should reference in their floating point numbers exercises, because it's just really cool. Putting it in there for like every track to use is a really good just central reference place. So information about the concept, a series of resources that people can use in their tracks to reference and to link out to. And then thirdly, a link of any exercises that other people have created that are about that concept, with the idea that you can then just fork them and repurpose them. So it was never supposed to be a sort of canonical, like, this is Exercism's opinion on what recursion looks like. It was intended to be here's a file that will simplify your life a little bit when trying to make an exercise on this thing and save you a shed load of time. And so that of course still means that we should treat those files properly and make sure they're well structured and well ordered and everything else, otherwise it just leads to chaos. But at the same time, I don't want the structures of the tracks or the exercises or our tooling or what Exercism looks like in 18 months from now to be driven by the fact that we put some reference documents together at the beginning. And that's one of the sort of tensions that's been had in making some decisions, tensions in a technical sense, of how we make these decisions is what's driving config. And I don't want it to be these reference files. I want it to be a track thinking about how a track fits together best.
Yeah.
So
So
like,
sorry.
go on,
The reference files are just there. They are not the goal. They're just for help. So if I do another concept, I check if there is this general file. I'll check if the content there is nice. And if the content is nice, I can adapt it for my language. It saves me a little bit of time because somebody else already thought about how to phrase things. It might be that it's not valid for my language and I still have to do the work myself. But if I don't, well, that's great. And I can see which other tracks have implemented an exercise around that concept, and I always start looking at how other language have approached this. So what is the themes that they use? What is the progression, etc. It's so much to learn from how other tracks do things, and this is just a way to find those implementations.
That's like practical source book, right? Like
Yeah.
the goal is to help maintainers
Precisely.
describe more, expediently, like in their given track.
Yeah.
And over time too, they'll become less utilized or important because the tracks will be fleshed out and have expressed a lot of those things. I mean, still, I guess useful at some level as a way to refer to.
Cool. Next question, Leigh.
Well, I'll pause there because I think this is really helpful for me, and just
Okay.
I think other people can chime in.
Okay. Does anyone have another question before we get to Eli's next question?
I don't really have a question, but I do have a comment. So I saw someone saying, I really want to do or help writing exercises, but I'm so bad at coming up with a story.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really feel that is a barrier, I do recommend posting it in just the maintainer channel,
Yeah.
or ping me or whatever, because I found that even with like unfleshed out or unfinished stories, mostly the track will come together and just figure out a way to, change it or add it or whatever. Like don't feel that the story is something that should withhold you from writing an exercise, because it is something that you can figure out after the fact.
And on the flip side to that, if you really love writing stories, there is a directory which I've just put a link to, which is a place for you to go and write your stories without having to work out about how they fit together in exercise and everything else. But if you've got a great story about counting or about looping or about something else that you imagine might work really well, PRing just stories to that repo, and then other people can come and just reuse those stories. So maximizing the skills that you feel you're good at and relying on the community to help. But I agree, like I like coming up with stories. Like post something in V3, I'll come up with a story for it. Like that's a fun thing to do. I don't have the time to go and write exercises for every track. I can't do that, but I can come up with a story. So and everyone else will have their own sort of balance of time on that. And there might be lots of people that aren't V3 maintainers, but quite like coming up with stories who can help out on just that bit. So if you're stuck and you want to do something, just say it. That would be my message to everyone there. Yeah.
As with all things, this becomes easier once you've done one. My very first exercise, I struggled so much, and now yesterday I just thought of, hey, this is a thing that my wife likes actually. Let's just build an exercise around that. So it's a little homage to my wife, by the way. So you can just find inspiration in tons of things, but it's a little bit of the early hurdle, and some people don't have that hurdle. I know DJ is very creative. There are many people that are very creative. I also love the Pac-Man exercise. There's so much good stuff coming out, and if we have everybody working on exercises, there will be lots of things that we can borrow. And we've also done themes that are recurring. So, for example, the strings theme is a logline parser, but there's so much you can do with loglines. For example, if you were to do something like batch processing of lists and aggregating them, map reduce, whatever, you can do the same theme, only with a different exercise. So we've done for C#, we've done logline parsing for strings, so substrings, etc. But we've also done it for enums, so like strong typed integers. So you can reuse the same theme, and you don't have to come up with new themes every time. That might also be a useful way.
I think it's really nice not to. I think that consistency is really nice in a track, to feel like you're building different bits of the same application or different elements of it. It's a really fun thing to do.
Yeah. So yeah.
And I found from personal experience working through like the V2, it was helpful to see concept themes repeated, because if you are more proficient in one language than another, you can internalize the differences and have that content be the bridge. Like I understand what this said thing is, like with the log lines, and then I can tease that out more internally.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, so the question I did have is, are we going to be okay with having multiple concept exercises for the same concept?
Presumably you don't mean in the same track.
I mean in the same track.
But are they then the same concept, or are they different aspects of the same concept?
Nope, they're doing exactly the same concept.
No. One of them should then be exercise in practicing that concept.
What's that?
One of them should then be moved to be a practice exercise to practice that concept.
Okay, I think that is a rule that we should put down somewhere. And the reason I'm saying is that someone proposed also porting the log lines exercise to JavaScript, and I said we already have a string exercise. So this is where it comes from.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of where they could port the logline exercise to JavaScript as a practice exercise.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'll
totally
be recommending. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone else have another question? Eli, back to you.
This is my last one. Mouth.
No worries, you're keeping things rolling.
Yeah.
Keep it going. So for individuals, kind of task switching, like what are some ways that you find most productive when contributing to Exercism?
That's a great question. I sort of want to make some sort of joke about substance abuse or something, but like
you cope, you don't produce.
But I'm not going to make the joke. Yeah, I mean, it's super hard. As anyone that has spoken to me at length over time knows, it's not something that I find particularly easy, let alone anyone else. I feel like half the time I can't finish one thought before I've got 5 other people demanding some other thought. And it is a challenge. I think there's Sleepless said it to me earlier, which was just like, turn off your notifications. And there is like a really important thing about just controlling the input you have coming in. So there are certain things I'd say, like make sure that any repositories on GitHub that you're working on, you're unsubscribed from unless you need to be subscribed to. So like everyone should be unsubscribed to the V3 repository. If you're subscribed to the V3 repository, you just have a wish for pain. Like we've set up code reviewers so that if somebody pings something that affects your track, it's going to notify you. We've got tooling in there for that. So we're deliberately trying to make it that people, especially with like monorepos like V3, don't get notified unless they need to be notified about something. So setting up your environment in that way is an important one. There's a really big difference between knowing what's like, I guess it's the signal noise divide, right? There's so much going on and so much that people are talking about and everything else, and you don't want to feel like you're missing out on stuff or missing stuff that's important. I think one of the key things is know what your most important / most urgent job is, and just try and focus on doing that, and try not to get pulled into everything else. If something's important, like I will post it in V3, or I will email about it, or I will make sure people know about it. It doesn't matter if you miss the discussions that are happening to make that important decision or to make that realization. And like, as you know, Sasha found out this week, for anyone that was following that conversation, just because everyone else says something, like if you disagree with something after the fact, like I'm still going to listen to that. And even if your opinion is outnumbered 100 to 1, like if your opinion's right, we'll still end up believing your opinion. So you don't need to be present in every single like discussion to feel like you don't want something to miss out or something bad to happen. It's okay to come to the party a little late and say, hold on, you've all not thought about this thing. So I think that's the first thing I'd say, is like focus on your stuff, focus on what's important to you and to your track, maximize where you can add the most value, and then like just listen to notifications that are the here ones or the channel ones in V3, and try and make sure that emails that I send don't get lost in spam or one of your promotions things in Gmail as well, because that makes it hard to keep up with things. There's then like the social element of Exercism, which is really important. You know, one of the fun things about Exercism is that we're all in like a tribe. You know, we are trying to do something that we care about. We're trying to build something together. We're trying to achieve something together. We've all got our own complex lives outside of that, and the world situation at the moment makes that even more complex. But you know, Exercism is a place where we can have chats like this and we can see each other's faces, and that can be a really nice, you know, way of just feeling connected to some people who have some shared goals. And so there's the sort of importance of trying to find slots like this in a week, which I'm trying to do more, where we have these moments where we can, as a team, as a community, as a tribe, we can interact with each other. without feeling like that's, you know, we need that endorphin hit every single day, because otherwise we just all get addicted to Slack. And I really suffer from that. You know, if Slack goes quiet, I'm like, where the hell are my endorphins? What's going on? You know, where am I going to get my hit from? Because I'm so used to getting pinged like 100 times an hour. So I think trying to find that balance as well is a really key thing. But it's super hard. It's stuff that I struggle with. You know, it is a challenge, finding your own rhythm. But I think my thing would be find what you're good at, find where you can add the most value, find where you're going to get the most reward back from Exercism, and then just try and really just double down on that one spot. Yeah, that's my ramblings.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, there's an interesting book by Cal Newport called Deep Work. And it sounds kind of rote, and kind of everyone kind of knows this intrinsically to some extent, but when we're having discussions and things like that, of course there are a lot of ideas that are being flung about, a lot of ways of, you know, trying to process something, and there's too many variables to basically process, right? So the important thing is that, of course, during that kind of discovery phase where everyone's talking to each other and stuff, yeah, be involved in those conversations to an extent, obviously have your input, think about what people are saying, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to actually producing the exercises, it's important to shut off at that point and then produce the exercise after you've had your discussions, after you've done all those things. And Cal's book goes through, like, you know, how to do that basically. And it really is just like shutting yourself off in the room, zero distractions, all those kinds of ideas that we've all heard of and stuff, but they work in terms of getting the stuff done. So I think, yeah, get involved in those discussions and have your little discovery phase where you're trying to figure stuff out, and then, but when it comes to actual execution, a lot of time for that, switch everything off and go and do that for an hour, 2 hours, however long it takes, then come out of that scenario and then start having those discussions again. So really just kind of be very hygienic with your time in terms of how you allocate it, and I think that'll increase the output really.
I massively agree. It's really loved that book a lot. He's also got another one that's out recently called Digital Minimalism, which I'm currently reading, which is also really good. But yeah, I think if, like, I hate pair programming with a passion, because I enjoy programming because I can just put some headphones on, close the world off, and just make something for a couple of hours. And as Taya says, it's that same thing here. It's like when you're making an exercise, when you're doing that, like, shut the world out and just enjoy that creative process of making that thing. You know, treat that like you're building something. And I think that will probably be much more satisfying for most people than trying to collaborate on these exercises. Like, get those ideas sorted first, have a look at what the people have done, but then do just like lock yourself out and go for it.
Cool, thanks. Those are great suggestions. I think, yeah, just more to internalize and like work through. Yeah, but that's all the questions I had so far. So pass the mic.
I really appreciate
what worked for me as a small addendum is to have the feeling that I'm working on things together. So if other people are doing reviews of my pull requests, I really get motivated because I see other people are looking into them and they're commenting on it. They get a feeling that you're building something with many people. So feel free, if you have a pull request, to ping me and have me review your pull request, and we can have these little discussions. I love those, and I usually get very energized by those. Might also work for other people too.
I think, yeah, I totally get that. I think something to build on there as well is I really hate collaborative copywriting. So I think, like, writing copy, writing language, writing stories is quite a personal thing. Like, you're putting together a vibe, you're putting together a theme. I find it really frustrating if I spend ages doing that and then somebody comes along and just starts like hacking at words here and there at things. And so I think if you're reviewing pull requests as well, like, it's much better to say, this bit confused me a little bit because of these things. Like, could you try rewording it in a different way that makes this bit clearer, rather than like actively going through and just hacking at someone's language. There are times where like that can be really helpful. Like for non-native speakers who have written something, like I'll often put a suggestion in, but I'm rephrasing it this way because it feels more native to me to write it this way. But I think like having a humility in giving reviews on, especially on copy on pull requests, it's very different from code where you've got tangible trade-offs. That's like, this is, you know, more readable, better speed, better performance, like whatever. I think with copy, there's a lot more art, a lot more feeling in there. And so just being empathetic to that when reviewing code reviews and talking in more like asking the person to fix their copy to try and achieve a goal is just so much nicer than hacking away at someone's copy. Yeah.
I think it comes down to that idea of how to give feedback, and feedback versus kind of solution, right? So you're not necessarily there to give the solution to that person's problem. You're there to say what your problem was with it when you were trying to consume what they wrote, right? So they're two very different things, right? And your solution will be different to what my solution is, and therefore I shouldn't be giving that person necessarily my solution. I should be giving them my thoughts as to why I failed to process that thing correctly, why I might have hit some sort of hurdle during reading that copywriting or whatever. So yeah, I think just better practice around how we give feedback on certain things, would help tremendously.
Yeah, it sounds like a really important point, just not being overly prescriptive, because that's so tied to like your individual take on something, which can be very defeating to the contributor who, could be coming from a very different cultural, social standpoint, which is embedded in the language, and that can be a great thing. Like and I feel like it's the natural language versus technical programming languages where there's whole systems of reasoning around how you write good code, whereas natural language like English, that doesn't convey. So having the empathetic priority of not being like just do it my way versus this is how I read it and these were some road bumps that I ran into.
Totally. I think something Nicole and I were talking about earlier was thinking of how something we've discussed for a long time is the idea of having like the mentor thing, making a much bigger deal of that within Exercism. So how we can teach people more how to give like empathetic feedback, how and not empathetic in be nice to somebody, but the things that we're talking about, empathetic in terms of not giving someone a solution, but giving somebody your thoughts, your feedback on something so that they can learn from that and come up with a solution. And if you do give a solution, giving it as an example of how you might put your thing into practice. But thinking about how that can build into Exercism. So what Josh has done with his Chrome extension recently, where if you're giving mentoring and you use certain words like just or why don't you just do this? It will flash up and it will say, don't do this. This is a really like anti-behavior for mentoring. So thinking about how we can build some of those prompts into Exercism, but also what Nicole and I were talking about of actually having like almost like a digital course that people can go through on how to improve their code review, their feedback, all of that sort of stuff is something that really transcends Exercism quite nicely, but is also like a really, really great way of maintaining Exercism's mentoring standards and everything else. Because I think a lot of the things that Taya is saying, it's not just because copy is more of an art form. It's just about the same thing should apply to code. It should be that you give what your problem is with something and give a solution as an example, not just telling someone what to do. It's something I do badly all the time in code review. I'm like, change this to this. And, I try and get a lot better at being like, this bit sort of smells a little bit to me. I might try doing something a bit like this. And actually often the person then comes up with a much better solution than my idea. Like this happens with me reviewing Carlo's pull requests for Exercism all the time. I'll come up with something and he'll come up with a much better solution because he's a much more thoughtful programmer than I am most of the time. But if I don't explain my reasoning, he won't get to that end solution because he won't understand why his code doesn't resonate with me. So yeah, just some external processing from me. There's a discussion going on in chat, just for those people that watch this later, because we don't get the chat window to appear in the thing, sadly. But discussing that people's sort of your pitch was saying his enjoyment of programming has dropped to like 0 since lockdown, and DJ was emphasizing saying that he's heard that a lot. I think, and Eric as well. This whole lockdown thing's like it's really challenging. Just losing your sort of normality of life and the rhythm that you're in, and those things that like bring you joy. It's a lot harder to get joy from like being locked in a room in front of a laptop the whole time when you're literally doing that 24/7. Like there's something nice about escaping to be in the quiet room with a laptop, like coding for a lot of people. But when that ceases to be you escaping from, you know, everything else, when it's just that, it does massively like change the vibe and everything else. So I think, you know, for anyone else that's struggling with that, I know for some people they've said that Exercism has been like a really nice escape for them. Tim just said that. Tim's a nurse, and so massive kudos to you, Tim, at the moment, as well as ever. But like, yeah, like in a situation like that, doing something like Exercism can be a great escape. For other people, it's been just the last thing they want to be doing is spending more time on a laptop thinking about code right now. So, you know, I think I'm super aware of the fact that people's behaviors and moods and attitudes are probably different for these 3 months. I'm increasingly feeling the pain myself more and more. So if you're watching this and sort of feeling guilty because you're not doing more Exercism and you had said that you would or committed to time, like, don't feel guilty about it. And if you're loving Exercism right now and it's helping you, that's great. Like, double down, you can make it for everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say as part of that as well. I remember hearing somewhere, I don't remember the source for it exactly. I think it was a philosopher or something that mentioned that. But basically, humans are designed to play. We're designed to mess around with things. We're designed to have fun. We're designed to go and explore things and do things like that. So if in this situation, you know, Exercism has become your play, you know, awesome. And if it hasn't, that's great as well. But we shouldn't be, I guess, the whole being cooped up in a room sort of thing in front of a laptop. It's more that our kind of options for play have been reduced down to, you know, very little. And now that when you're obviously your options are put down, you know, put down lower, then you kind of struggle and you don't have that variation in life to kind of do other things or all that kind of stuff. So it's whatever feels like play to you is the thing that you will go towards. And for a lot of people it will be Exercism, and right now a lot of people it won't be Exercism, and it really is down to where you sit on that right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We saw a big spike in both usage and usage mentoring and contribution, like in the first 2 or 3 weeks when this started. I think because a lot of people were stopping commuting, they suddenly got an extra couple of hours back in their days. They started, like, you know, having a bit more time, started doing that. And then we saw like a big drop off suddenly in comparison to that peak, probably 2 weeks later, where it's like, it's almost like everyone's just started suffering from this like mass apathy towards life, you know, a general lethargicness, which is probably what happens when we all get deficient in vitamin D. But yeah, I agree with Ty, like finding that play thing. And also, you know, for a lot of people, a lot of like that exercise and things comes into that for people. For me, like going climbing in the evening is a huge part of where I just like unwind and unplug, and I can't do that. And so it's hard to then find something to replace that with. But yeah, we're sort of way off piste here, but like, yeah, I just feel I feel the pain of what you're saying, Michael, and everyone else as well. It's yeah, challenging. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think we're sort of an hour in now, which is what we try and aim for. Has anyone got anything else they would like to ask?
Yeah, I was gonna make a general comment if possible. If you guys don't know me, I'm Taya. I was brought on to do the UI stuff and the new design stuff for V3. So if you guys have any thoughts and things, I mean, I'm already processing a lot of comments and things and what people have to say, but I'm happy to hear everybody out for what they think are the weak points of Exercism, where we could, you know, make massive changes and do things that are, you know, highly impactful for people. At the moment, we're working through some things. I don't want to say too much, but we're working through some of the track stuff at the moment. It's looking really good right now, but obviously we'd like to get everybody else involved in that process at some point in the future. So at the moment, it's still very early days, but yeah, I've started that process of working through V3 design-wise, and yeah, we're working on that.
So yeah, welcome, Ty. So Ty and I have worked together with Nicole in the past as well, and it's always been fun. The general way that like we're going to try and run this is, so I'm working closely with like Ty day to day to just flesh everything out, trying to, you know, understand the feel of what V3 is going to feel and look like, and then start to think about sort of page to page, flow to flow, how that all fits. We're taking that sort of those nubs of ideas and Ty is mocking them up and doing stuff, and then sharing that with like Eric and Nicole and Katrina as well, and Carlo and Charles. And then once we've sort of got to a point where we all feel like this is a good enough first pass, I'm going to put together a small working group a little like we did with the V3 stuff at the beginning, where we just then bounce those around with a small group that we sort of understand where we're trying to get to for V3, and have probably got some experience of being on Exercism and everything else. Have another sort of set of feedback and iterations on that, and then once we've got that phase sort of we're happy with, we'll then start sharing it with the other contributors and the wider community, which will no doubt cause a huge amount of feedback, which I'll protect Tayab's soul from as much as I possibly can.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I remember putting out the first prototype of V2, and it was soul destroying for me. So yeah, going through as many iterations as we can before we get that volume of community feedback would definitely be nice. So if you're interested in being in that sort of early working group, like, feel free to ping me, and we'll put that together at some point, I guess within the next sort of month or so. In terms of timeframes, this has been asked a couple of times. I'm still hoping to get like a beta version of various little bits of the site together. I've found that my coding time has reduced to 0 in the last month. I've literally not written a line of code. So I'm trying to just find some time where I can just go. V3 is effectively a total rewrite from scratch. Like, I'm going to be porting lots of the code over from V2, but effectively I need to just go away and write the whole website. So at some point I need to find a way to lock myself away from the world and do that. But once I get 3 weeks of good time on that, I think I can break the back of a lot of it and then get a staging environment out that means people can then start to play with what the tracks look like, and with the test runners and the in-browser coding environment and that sort of stuff, which is going to be an important part of just getting a feel for how the exercises you are all working on are going to be put together. So yeah, just to give you a little idea on that, I'm not going to commit to a deadline because it determines on my mental health and sanity and time, but as soon as that can get done, it will get done. Yeah, cool. Anyone else have anything to say? Awesome. Thank you all for that. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to those that asked questions or chatted on the side, especially. It makes my life easier because my throat feels less sore at the end of it. And yeah, massively appreciate all that everyone's doing, especially during these challenging times. I feel like it will all be worth the effort that we're putting in. It's exciting to see those exercises coming together. It's exciting to imagine how this might feel. It's exciting to sort of see a couple of Tayab's ideas and how they might work, and just imagine this big picture coming together. So yeah, thank you all, and thank you for keeping me sane by chatting to me as well. You get my endorphins going each day. I will schedule another one of these for some time next week, and I will put this on YouTube later. Have a nice rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.